Now, after Mark Trestman and Phil Emery were sent packing following the 2014 season, a lot of Bears fans sat there and waited with bated breath and were wondering what's going to happen. And they were talking about all of a sudden magically they've discovered this love for a full and complete rebuild. Never mind the guy that's been screaming about it for years, talking about, hey, the Cubs are doing it, the Cubs are doing it, and it's going to pay off for them. And look what's happened. The Chicago Cubs won the World Series. And I'm a happy man. Imagine if the Bears followed the same philosophy and eventually did the same thing and won a Super Bowl again. Oh my God. You want to talk about a guy that could really die happy at that point in time? That would be me. So a lot of Bears fans were very excited when John Fox was hired. After years of going down the path of getting the hot assistant like the Dave Wansteads or hiring assistant coaches like Dick Duran, Lovie Smith, or going to the freaking CFL and getting a guy like Mark Trestman, here was the Bears going outside of their norms. Here was the Bears going after a proven, established, veteran NFL head coach, a guy who's done it before and had been successful at not just one place, but two places before. I get it. John Fox was a name you didn't really expect to be out there, and then he became available, and then it was a thought and a chance that the Bears could end up with him. And it's like, wow, they ended up with him. This is pretty cool. And I get it in theory. This is a guy that led turnarounds in Carolina and Denver before. So you think that he could do the same thing in Chicago. I was kind of iffy on the hire. If you remember going back, I could see some of those things. But to me, coaches that typically get a third shot, that go round typically doesn't go very well. Guys like Pete Carroll being excluded. They are by far the exception to the rule. And I always had concerns about the fact that a John Fox was a coach that you're bringing in to a long-term rebuild type of situation where he's really kind of a short-term guy. This is a guy that was already entering his 60s, that had some health issues, that is probably desperate to want to win a Super Bowl to kind of validate himself. Did he really want to come into a situation where the Bears realistically were 4 or 5 ways from being in a position where they could potentially do so? And with his conservative nature and some of the things that he does, was he really the right type of guy that you were going to wanted to bring around a roster that was going to have a lot of upheaval and going to have to feature a lot of young guys, and you were going to have to get these young guys to play at a very high level at some point in time. Only time ultimately was going to tell. And I still think in some ways only time is going to tell. But you look at the results so far of John Fox in Chicago. Year 1, 2015, the team goes 6-10. Now, they went 1-7 at home, which was inexcusable. If you're going to win some games, at least win some games at home. That's embarrassing when you're trying to sell season tickets and fans think they're going to go and see the team lose at home every week. That's not anything you ever want to do. But on the flip side, what does that mean? That means they went 5-3 on the road. So that means they were going into hostile environments and winning football games. So that's something you could build on for the future. And while they only went 1-5 in the NFC North, at least in John Fox's first year, they managed to find a way to beat Green Bay once. I mean, look at how little Mark Trestman beat Green Bay in his short time. Lovie Smith especially, Dick Duran before that, Dave Wanstead before that. Chicago Bears victories over the Green Bay Packers for the past 20-plus years have been very, very few and far between. Believe me, I know. So it's kind of nice to see them. Hey, they beat Green Bay once. That's pretty cool. So you had a lot of Bears fans starting to get excited about this team. They had a somewhat premium first-round pick in the 2016 draft. And then you had the history of John Fox in year number 2. You were going to have money to play with in free agency, premium draft picks, and quite a number of draft picks. And now you get year 2 of the system of John Fox. And in Carolina in his second year, he took him to the Super Bowl. In Denver in his second year, he took him to the Super Bowl. And I don't know if Bears fans had those types of visions for John Fox. Or was it year 3 that he got them to the Super Bowl? It was year 3 he got them to the Super Bowl in Denver. I apologize. But there was a major turnaround in year 2. Now granted, that turnaround in Denver in year 2, that big improvement in year 2 came when they signed Peyton Manning in free agency. I'm just saying. First ballot Hall of Fame quarterbacks being available at the tail end of their career in free agency that could still actually play, at least for the first couple of years in Denver, at least he was able to. They don't come around very often. So there's all this excitement talking about the fact that the Bears went 6-10 in year 1 and the roster wasn't very good. You got some money to play with, some premium picks. You can improve the roster. You're going to have a last place schedule. This is a team that could potentially be sniffing around a winning record. Maybe if you get crazy, start thinking about contending for a wild card spot. John Fox's year 2 turnaround. Year 2 turnaround. It's all I heard about all season. Well, that shit ain't happened. After 9 games, the Bears are 2-7. They've lost to Houston, Philadelphia, Dallas, Indianapolis, Jacksonville, Green Bay, Tampa Bay. The only 2 wins they have, ironically enough, are against teams in the NFC North. It's Detroit and Minnesota, 2 teams with actually winning records. It's kind of crazy when you look at the Bears' schedule and the way it's played out a little bit. I think their strength of schedule was much better than we anticipated. Houston's in the playoff mix. Philly's in the playoff mix. Dallas is in the mix to get the number 1 overall seed in the NFC. Green Bay, even with the losing record, still in the playoff mix. I mean, it's crazy. The schedule ended up being tougher than it looked like before the year started, at least to me. But then you look offensively, they're 31st in the league in points scored. Their defense has improved some, but I don't think it's improved as much as maybe was envisioned or anticipated. And, I'm just looking, and I'm waiting for that year 2 turnaround. Year 2 turnaround. It's not happening. And I wonder, frankly, if it ever is going to happen. I wonder how plugged in John Fox actually is, how invested he actually is in getting the Bears to be better. Because right now the results don't look very good, and coming off of that embarrassing loss on Sunday to the Buccaneers, you wonder if it's ever going to get that much better under John Fox in Chicago. And I know there's going to be excuses, and several of them are going to be, frankly, lousy excuses. There's going to be the Jay Cutler excuse. Well, he hasn't had Cutler the full year. That's going to be one excuse from the pro-Cutler nut jobs. Then on the flip side, you're going to sit there and say, well, he's been saddled with Jay Cutler the rest of the season, and that's been the problem. And the other guy was freaking Brian Hoyer. What do you expect? There are other teams that succeed in the NFL and are succeeding this year without having great quarterback play. And the Kansas City Chiefs get mediocre to average play at best out of Alex Smith, and they're 7-2. The Houston Texans have Brock Osweiler, and he stinks, and they're 6-3 and leading their crappy division. Even the Los Angeles Rams with shitty-ass Case Keenum, who is worse than Jay Cutler and Brian Hoyer. The Rams are sitting at 4-5. So those are 3 teams that I just named whose quarterback situations are as bad, if not worse, than what the Chicago Bears had with Jay Cutler and Brian Hoyer throughout the entirety of the season so far. And all 3 of those teams are better than the Bears, and the record is better than the Bears. In the case of Kansas City and Houston, they're leading their respective divisions, and they could very well end up in the playoffs. So whether it be Jay Cutler or Brian Hoyer, you can take that quarterback excuse and shove it up your ass because it's not a good one. The fact that it's only year 2. Well, this is the problem is we've been hyping up so much John Fox's year 2 turnaround. Now all of a sudden it's wait till year 3, year 4, when he really gets all the pieces in place. Maybe there are some pieces in place and John Fox just isn't doing a good enough job along with the staff of getting more out of them. Because you look at other situations where coaches are only in their first year or their second year, and there are so many teams that are doing better than the Bears. You look at the Oakland Raiders in Del Rio's second year, they're 7-2. Philadelphia Eagles, with a rookie quarterback and a first-year head coach at Doug Peterson, are 5-4. The Atlanta Falcons, second-year head coach Dan Quinn, 6-4. The Tennessee Titans promoted their interim guy, and they're 5-5. And just spanked the Green Bay Packers. And the Miami Dolphins, with former Bears offensive coordinator Adam Gase in their first year, they're 5-4. So you got a lot of these teams in the first or second year of the regime that they have, and some of these teams not really being that much better off from a talent standpoint than the Bears, especially you look at Tennessee and Miami, and maybe to a slightly lesser degree Philadelphia. You wouldn't say those teams, their talent cupboards are overflowing. And yet they're all in better positions than the Bears. They're more competitive teams than the Bears, and they have better records than the Bears. And all 3 of those teams have patterns, visions of potentially getting a playoff spot in year 1 or 2 of their current head coach. The Bears in year 2 of John Fox are thinking about a top 5 draft pick in the 2017 NFL draft. And then you talk about injuries. Other teams have injuries too. And yes, the Bears have had a lot of injuries, some costly injuries. But if you're a quality coaching staff, you find a way to overcome those injuries. You put guys in positions to succeed. You mask your deficiencies. You accentuate your positives and your strengths, and you get the job done. Injuries happen. That's a part of the game. If anything, is a reflection of the lack of depth on the roster, but also the lack of the ability to coach a next man up type of philosophy and having these guys ready. So I don't buy that excuse either. So you start to get to the point in time where you start to wonder, hey, if we don't get some more progress here in year number 2, and it continues down this path where they're getting wiped out and dominated by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, is it time for John Fox to be fired? Is it time for this organization to move on before he sinks them in an even bigger sinkhole than they already are? Some of the excuses, again, like I said, that are going to be made for John Fox are pathetic and they're bad. And they're not going to work with me, and I'm not going to buy them. But at the end of the day, your new general manager attached himself to John Fox. You've got to give John Fox more time. Because if you're already ready to fire John Fox after 2 years, then that means you have to fire Ryan Pace as a result. Because his number one job of the program was to get the right guy in as head coach. And after 2 years, you're already ready to move on from that head coach. Why in the fuck would you let this guy continue to assemble a roster when he couldn't get his most important hire right? And at the end of the day, 2 years again is not enough. And furthermore, on top of that, a lot of Bears fans are just like me this season. We're just riding out the tide, secretly hoping that this Bears team gets a really high draft choice to where they can get a young quarterback and actually really begin the process of starting over and rebuilding. And we don't really want to let Jay Cutler stay around anymore. But more importantly, in this case, I'm not a fan of letting Jay Cutler sink a third administration. He already sunk Jerry Angelo and Lovie Smith. He sunk Phil Emery and Mark Trestman. Are we really going to allow him to sink John Fox and or Ryan Pace? That's not fair to them. And based off of the workings of the previous administration and dingbats like Ted Phillips and the McCaskey family signing off on the ridiculous Cutler deal, Pace and Fox came into a very disadvantageous situation with a mediocre, crappy quarterback who's a horrible leader that can't stay healthy for a 16-game season. You're not winning anything in the NFL of any note or significance with Jay Cutler as a starting quarterback. You're just not. And to sit there and measure these guys off of the mistakes of previous administrations when they can't even get out from under the mistakes of the previous administration, I don't think that's fair. Because until they get rid of Cutler and until they get a young quarterback that you can start to develop and build, you're not rebuilding anything. In fact, the rebuilding project has been on hold until they can get rid of Cutler and get that young quarterback. Once you get that young quarterback, and once you begin that true rebuilding process, that's when I think you could really truly evaluate general manager Ryan Pace and head coach John Fox. And, to be honest, in year 2, we've seen some improvements on the defensive side of the ball. Some of the young players, when they've been on the field, especially first-round pick Leonard Floyd, he seems to be getting better as the season goes along. DeAndre Hall, when he was healthy, he was looking like a guy that should be one of the 2 starters outside at corner for this team. Jordan Howard, their 5th-round pick, the running back from Indiana, like I talked about, by the midway point of this season, I thought he was going to be the feature back. He didn't even wait that long to become the feature back. So you've seen some improvements on defense, and then on offense, you see some reason for hope going forward. Their offensive line's got to get better. I don't know that they can really justify sinking big-time money into Alshon Jeffrey long-term. But, it seems like their running game is pretty solid. They've invested some in their offensive line with Kyle Long and TJ Lang. Maybe they get Hronis Grasu back from his knee injury next year. The offensive line could be solid, at least in the interior. And firing Fox, when you've got some of these improvements on defense and, some guys that are being given opportunities on both sides of the ball, some of them are playing well and doing some good things, I think it's a mistake because you're basically admitting a mistake really early and you're starting over again. And one of the worst things you could do when you're in a rebuild process is basically start over again before the rebuild's really gotten underway. That's what the Cleveland Browns and other crappy organizations do. Do you want to really get into that realm of being like the Cleveland Browns and firing a head coach every 2 years? You can't do that. That's not a formula or path to success for anybody. So while I'm frustrated with John Fox and the Bears right now, and I make no excuses for the crappy performance that I've seen in 2016, and they shouldn't either, and other fans shouldn't either, I think if any fans really start to rally around the thought of firing John Fox, I think it's a panic move, and it's just unnecessary. The Chicago Bears are the Chicago Bears. They're not the skid marks of the NFL. Let Cleveland do this shit.